Hi everyone. Okay, I hope I'm live. I'll be checking in a second to find out. Well, I guess I am live. That's very good news. Okay, please share for me. I meant to start at 9:30, and I had a couple of technical issues, which I've now fixed. But I won't be able to do any sharing tonight, so I'm going to rely on you. That should take care of the echo. Hey, Kay. Hi, Nissa. Hi, Dolores. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. Bill Stokes has joined. Hi, Bill. How are you? Russ has joined. Hey, Russell Gorman. And Stephen Wolfbrandt. Hey, Steve. How are you doing? Please share for me. I haven't had a chance to do any tonight. Russ says I can hang with you a bit, but I've got to call it a night soon. Thank you, Russ. I understand perfectly. Thanks for hanging with me a bit. Sorry to be late, but there was a meditation call for Bernie at 9 o'clock, and I didn't want to compete with that particular meditation call. Okay, let's get into the results for the debate. So here's what I think. Okay, I think that Bernie won the debate. It's pretty clear to me he won it. Unfortunately, though, Biden had the best of his debates in this particular campaign, and he did not show very much to the undiscerning eye of the cognitive decline which has characterized his campaign so far. So, I think that was a problem for Bernie because Bernie wasn't able to blow him out of the water in terms of getting him sufficiently flustered for him to, begin to rant a little, or to go here, or to go there, or to misspeak a whole lot. However, what Biden did, which was not very good, at all, is that he provided misinformation and he plain lied about his past record. The area in which he provided the misinformation, of course, was on Medicare for All. Now, he's been providing misinformation about that for months and months and months. So, of course, some people would be justified in thinking that he was lying about that too. But he was certainly lying about what he said on Social Security. And he's been lying about that for months now. But last night he found a whole new way of doing it. He looked into the camera, straight into the camera. He eyed us all through the camera. And he lied about statements he has made and votes he has cast going all the way back to the 1980s. He seems to have forgotten that there's YouTube today. There's YouTube. And there's video. And of course, he's relying on the inability of his voters, okay, many of them are older voters like myself and Bonnie, uh, and a very large number of them are not so internet savvy, may not even have the internet, rely on cable news, and so perhaps he felt safe that he could simply lie. He was questioned very vigorously by Bernie. He was very slippery when it came to his support for the bankruptcy bill of, was it 2003 or 2004? The bill that proved the banks actually run the place. He lied about the Hyde Amendment and his previous support for the Hyde Amendment and his support for the reproductive rights, okay, of women, which was at best very, very wishy-washy. His support, okay, for the Hyde Amendment, of course, was not wishy-washy. He voted many times for the Hyde Amendment. He denied that, of course. He denied that he was central to the bankruptcy bill. So today and last night, there was circulating on Twitter, okay, and on the internet, quotes from Orrin Hatch, clips, essentially video clips, talking about what a great contribution he had made to the writing of the bankruptcy bill that put that removed the choice of bankruptcy to so many middle-class people and has grievously hurt them. Now, the crime bill did not actually come up last night, and I think this is an area where Bernie should have attacked very, very strongly. I know Biden would come back and talk about the fact that Bernie voted for the crime bill, but the answer to that, of course, was that Bernie had the bad choice of either voting for the violence, the violence against the Violence Against Women Act was part of the crime bill. Bernie had a choice of voting for that or voting against the crime bill. So he swallowed hard and he voted for the crime bill. But in the run-up to the vote, he strongly objected to the coupling and he strongly objected to the crime bill. And ever since that time, he worked against the crime bill and has advocated for the repeal of the crime bill. Of course, the crime bill was the bill used by prosecutors such as Kamala Harris, who was destroyed on this issue of the crime bill. And her campaign slipped away to nothing when attacked, okay, by Tulsi Gabbard. But who was the person behind the crime bill? Oh, not even behind the crime bill. Who was the person who wrote the crime bill? It was Joe Biden. He was the most responsible person for the crime bill in the Senate. Okay. So I think Bernie should have attacked him on this, and Bernie missed something on this. But he went after him on the Iraq War, on the Defense, okay, of Marriage Act, okay, on most other areas where his record was bad. Okay, and so he did what he should have done in many other debates. Now, I still don't think he was aggressive enough. I think what Bernie needed to do, okay, in this debate was to allow the anger he must feel about Biden's record to come out. Now, Bernie speaks strongly on Biden's record, but he never allows his anger over Biden's lying to really come out. I mean, he should have just straight out said, Joe, you're lying. Lying Joe. Lying Joe. Lying Joe. Lying again, Joe. Lying again, Joe. You've lied about all these matters. It's a matter of record. It's on YouTube. It's all there. My campaign has the receipts. We'll be posting lots of these videos on every one of these issues we've been talking about now. That's what Bernie should have done. Okay. Now, of course, also Biden should have received some criticism from the moderators of the debate, who obviously knew he was lying about his record on all these matters. He was lying about how many times, brazenly lying about how many times he had tried to cut Social Security, okay, and Medicare. And of course, he could have contrasted his own record in a better way compared to Biden in the context of Biden's lies. He could have made it clear to people that Joe Biden was lying to the seniors who were voting for him overwhelmingly, as well as to the black voters who were voting for him overwhelmingly. He should have talked more about Biden's civil rights record. He talked some about that, but he should have talked more about the civil rights record, okay, of Joe Biden. He didn't do that as effectively as he might. So he won the debate, but I don't think he really carried the day in terms of changing the momentum of the campaign. And that's a problem, because even though the narrative of Bernie is likely to take hold, in other words, his narrative in this debate is likely to take hold against Joe Biden, maybe over a period of 2, 3, or 4 weeks. It's not going to take hold swiftly enough to affect the primaries that are going to occur tomorrow, or are apparently going to occur tomorrow. Now, here too, there was an issue, because Biden tweeted last night asking all his people to show up at the polls. Okay? In spite of the fact that showing up at the polls in person is particularly dangerous for seniors, for those over 70 and those, okay, who are over 80. It puts them at very high risk in the present situation. Also, in many of these states, the poll workers are older people, are seniors over 65. And they too would be taking unusual risks. Now, in this respect, it's relevant to mention that CDC guidelines, which have been released now, say no gatherings over 50 people. No gatherings over 50 people. Of course, the numbers of people who are going to show up at the polls are going to be far more than 50 people. We saw the lines on Super Tuesday in Texas. Now, okay, in Arizona, supposedly for fear that they wouldn't have enough equipment and sanitizer, okay, and ability to wipe down the voting machines to cover the whole state. They reduced the polling places from something like 250 polling places. I don't know if I have that number exactly right, but it's on that order, to 151 polling places. Now, what the state authorities did in that case is they said the 151 polling places will be anywhere at polling places, so people can show up, okay, at any of them and can vote, okay, at any of them. So if a polling place is overcrowded, then it can show up at a second polling place or a third polling, or if it can continue to search until people find a polling place that's not so crowded. But no one knows how this is going to work out. It could still work out where there are lines of people waiting for hours to vote and risking getting the coronavirus to stand online. So Biden, on the one hand, is talking to people about the science and listening to the science. And on the other hand, he's tweeting at his people to come out tomorrow and to vote for him in Ohio, in Arizona, in Illinois, and in Florida, urging them strongly to come out and vote for him, and tweeting this out in contradiction to his warning that people should be following the science. So this is the height of hypocrisy, and it is endangering the lives of people, in particular populations at risk. And those populations really range. There's some statistics that have come out from some of the other nations concerning the risks that people take at particular ages. And these statistics are very striking, okay, in that there's a very strong gap, a very large gap between the risks of contracting the disease that people under 50 take compared to the people between the ages of 50 and 70 take, and the age of people over 70. Those statistics, which I think come from Italy, if I recall correctly, show that roughly 32% of people from 50 to 70 are likely to contract the virus, and that people from 70 on up are slightly more likely to contract the virus. Roughly, I think the figure was at 35%. So it's 33% and 35% for those two groups. But if people are under 50, then it drastically drops off in terms of the level of risk. I think the people from 0 to 18 have something like a 0 to 5% chance of contracting the virus. Okay, and the people, from 0 to 10 have roughly 5%. And it's a little greater from 10 to 20, and still greater from 20 to 30 and 30 to 40, okay, and 40 to 50. But in all those groups, it's much, much lower. There's a huge gap, something like from 16% or so, suddenly up to 32 to 33% for the people in the 50 to 70 group. So the very voters who are likely to vote for Joe Biden are also the people most likely to contract the coronavirus when they actually get to the polls. And the poll workers themselves are among the highest group with the highest risk of contracting the coronavirus. The primaries tomorrow should have been canceled. Now, the governor of Ohio, okay, a Republican by the name of Michael DeWine, who's a well-known Republican, okay, a very well-known Republican, Hi, is there a problem, Bonnie?
I can't find you.
You can't find me? Okay. Bonnie says she can't find me. Let me see if anybody else is having a problem.
How would you know?
Uh, no, it seems like people are making comments. Illinois got caught. The elections are rigged. Yeah, there are many comments. Okay, so I'm assuming everybody can hear me, okay, and that everything is all right. Is that correct? I hope so. There seems to be smiling and likes in response to what I just said. I haven't seen an additional comment yet, but I'm going to assume that I am all right, and it was simply a problem Bonnie was having with her machine. Anyway, I'll go on now. Okay, so anyway, Governor DeWine asked asked a judge to postpone the primary, I believe, until June sometime, and he refused to do so. The judge turned down the request. It was unclear at the time that I began the live stream whether the governor had taken it to a higher court, okay, or not. Yes, a number of people are commenting here that the state of Illinois has announced the election results, okay, a day before the elections. Is it really the state of Illinois, or is it one of the cable TV stations, okay, in Illinois that has announced the election results? Okay, I'd heard a report of that, okay, on Nico House's program that they had called Joe Biden the winner by 50 to 45 without any voting taking place, okay, on election day. So, of course, there's something very strange going on there and extremely dishonest. But, okay, Rick says it's a TV station, and Russ says, okay, it's the MSM, the mainstream media. Well, anyway, okay, it's going to be very notorious. So, it's terrible that these primaries are going on tomorrow. The health and the lives of people are being jeopardized, okay, are being jeopardized by governors failing to act to try to postpone the primaries. Georgia's postponed its primary, okay, and Louisiana postponed, okay, its primary. Why can't the 4 states tomorrow postpone the primaries? Now, okay, I freely admit in calling for this that I'm a supporter, okay, of Bernie Sanders. And I don't think that Bernie is quite ready for these primaries tomorrow, and that it would be to his advantage if the primaries were postponed. But really, I'm not calling for the cancellation of the primaries simply to advantage Bernie. There are lives on the line. There's no question about it. There are lives on the line. And there's no excuse for holding this particular primaries. It's a danger to health and safety. Joe Biden himself should call for these primaries to be postponed tomorrow, probably for at least 8 weeks, because it looks like the peak of this crisis is going to hit within a week, perhaps. Why? Well, that gets into what is happening. But before I go into what is happening, okay, I do want to make sure I complete what I wanted to say about what's been going on. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go on now. Okay. At this point. What is happening is the United States is finally starting to test in quantity. Finally, it is starting to test in quantity. And when I say in quantity, I'm saying that there are reports that they're shipping millions of tests, okay, in this week. I think 1.4 million tests is the figure for this week. Okay. And for next week, it should be even higher. Now, of course, compared to our overall population, it's still a relatively small number. But over the next 4 weeks, the shipping of tests is going to accelerate because many labs have been brought online and they're producing their own tests based on the WHO standard. They no longer have to wait for the CDC to actually succeed, okay, in doing this. Okay. So that now is happening. Now, we've learned from other countries, okay, a few very, very important things. Okay, what we've learned is, in general, the reported number of cases in any given nation doesn't correspond. It does not at all correspond to the actual total number of cases. In some nations, for example, okay, in Italy, okay, and in the UK, according to Dr. John Campbell, a public health specialist, expert in the UK, most probably when a nation has not been testing very much, the actual case figure may be 10 to 20 times as much as the reported case figure. Now, here in the United States, we've been testing hardly at all. Only thousands have been tested so far in the population, but the virus has spread now to almost every state. As of this morning, according to Campbell's program, there were 3,774 reported cases in the United States. That means if we take the 10 times figure as a conservative figure, the likely number of cases in the United States by now is probably close to 38,000. And that number is going to be growing each day. And we will see it grow very, very rapidly as they test and find the people who are positive for the virus. And they're going to be doing that, as I said, in an increasingly accelerated fashion over the next 4 weeks. So we are going to see this curve of reported cases, okay, a virus sharply peaking. In fact, it's likely to follow the pattern we're seeing, okay, in Italy, which has been a very, very shocking pattern. Now, there is some good news on the virus front. The good news on the virus, there are two pieces, okay, of really good news, okay, on the virus front. At first, the scientists thought that they just didn't know whether people who had, okay, the coronavirus, but who were cured or recovered from it would be able to get it again. Okay. Then people came forth with the idea, well, maybe they would have immunity for a year or something like that. It was very likely that that would be the case. Then they started finding cases where people who had had the virus and who reportedly recovered and were let out of the hospital had to go back into the hospital. Okay, and some died even due to the fact that the virus had apparently recurred. But when the doctors examined the evidence, they concluded that it did not actually reoccur, but it had never been fully cured in the first place. And they're pretty sure of that now. So now the public health experts are saying that, oh, they expect that people will have immunity from the virus once they recover for 1 year and perhaps even up to a lifetime. It may be very long-term immunity to the virus. There's no way of knowing now, but it's likely that I shouldn't say it's likely, okay, that it's more than a year. It's likely that it's going to be at least a year, and it could very well be a lot more. This, of course, is good news. The second piece of good news is that we've been talking here about the idea that we have to flatten the curve of the virus, that if you look at the curve as basically going up here to a high peak, and then tending to flatten out, okay, and to go down. Okay, in other words, having a parabola type, okay, of pattern. We've been talking about flattening the curve out so that the peak, okay, is much lower. And that's, of course, very, very important, because if the peak happens to occur at a far lower level than the potential peak, then the chances are greater that the public health system in various nations will be able to handle the virus, that all the people who really need treatment for the virus will be able to get treatment. Okay. What has been found now in China and in South Korea, okay, as well, okay, is that those two countries, through taking very draconian actions and through testing very, very large numbers of people, essentially attempting to test everybody and then to treat everybody who gets sick, to isolate everybody who gets sick, to quarantine the people who get sick, and to treat the people who get sick, that they've been not only to flatten the curve, but they've been able to bring it up short so that it goes down to a relatively low case fatality rate, and also to a case fatality rate which is far lower. For example, let's take the Italian situation now. As of this morning, there was something like 24,747 reported cases, okay, in Italy. The fatalities were 1,089. Okay, now the Italians think that figure, the fatality figure, is a hard figure, that other people haven't died from the virus, just the close to 1,100 people. That's all. Well, that's plenty, of course, okay, but that's all. They also think, though, that the actual number of cases of people who have contracted the virus but are showing few symptoms or no symptoms is probably 10 times that amount. So not 24,747, but 247,000, roughly 750, something like that. Okay. When you do the calculation on that, the case fatality rate falls to something like 0.4%, which is beginning to get down to the levels that approach the flu. Okay, the flu the flu fatality rate is something like 0.1%, between 0.1% and 0.2%, okay, of 1%. Okay, so it turns out that the fatality rates may not be as high as they appear to be from the early statistics, where there aren't so many cases. In other words, the early statistics actually discover very few cases. Okay, so when 150 people die, it looks like the case fatality rate for this virus is very high. In some nations, it looked like it might be 6%, which was very frightening to people. In others, maybe 4%. Even 2% is a very frightening figure. If you look at 2%, okay, for the United States as a whole, 330 million people in the United States with a fatality rate of 2%, that's, what is it? 1% is 10% is 33 million. 1% is 3.3 million. We're talking 6.6 million people. Even at a 2% fatality rate. So to make this a bearable event, we really need to bring it down to the 0.1% level. If we bring the curve up short, we have time to test everybody, okay, and treat everybody. We have a fighting chance to get it down to something like that, maybe 33,000 deaths in the United States, 66,000 deaths, okay, or something like that. Certainly a very serious type of situation. We don't want to see that. Of course, we don't want to see that. But it is a hell of a lot better than 660,000 or 6.6 million people. Okay, so those two things coming to light earlier today were hopeful signs. Okay, but to correspond with those hopeful signs, we have many things that are raging here in the United States. And those things are greatly affecting the political situation and the economic situation. They greatly affect, okay, us all. So, I'm looking at some of the headlines from Common Dreams right now, this evening. Okay, the Dow has dropped by a record-smashing 3,000 points, the largest drop, okay, in history. Okay, and the subheadline is that the market is at the mercy of the virus. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but we're looking at a stock market crash. We're looking at maybe closing the markets for days to try to avert a panic and to try to avert, okay, a crash. Okay, of course, we're looking at many people staying home from work. Some people can work from home, and that's great for them. But there are many other people who cannot work from home, who have to be protected and who have to go to work. Okay, and there are other things happening. For example, in order to contain the outbreak, okay, of the coronavirus, there was a release of prisoners, okay, in Ohio today. The ACLU is calling on officials nationwide to do the same, to release the prisoners from jails because the overcrowding in jails, just the concentration of a large number of people in a small space, means that they'd all be contracting the coronavirus. And that would put a tremendous load on the healthcare system. Also, people are noticing that demand is growing for grocery store employees and other frontline workers to receive hazard pay because they are saving our lives amid the coronavirus outbreak. Since many of us have to stay home and self-isolate as much as possible, obviously the crew members at the grocery stores have to stay on the job. And they are terrified, knowing that their job is putting them on the front lines, and the supplies of masks and other things they need in order to protect them is not there right now. The masks are going now almost entirely to healthcare workers. Most people can't get the masks. Moreover, calls are growing across the country to delay in-person primary voting and move to mail-in ballots as the coronavirus is sweeping across the U.S. I'm just reading headlines now. Also, the compromise made by Nancy Pelosi with the Trump administration, Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin, the two hammered out a compromise for a coronavirus relief bill to pass the Congress. The Senate, of course, delayed. Senator Mitch but decided to take the weekend off and to contemplate further whether he was going to cancel the scheduled the leave from the Senate that the senators were scheduled to take to go home, and see the voters. He was contemplating that. Now, since that time, he's decided to cancel. And so they are going to stay in session. They're not going to close the session out. But they were off over the weekend. He didn't keep them there over the weekend. He took a holiday when the coronavirus compromise actually needed to pass. So now a Republican senator, Tom Cotton, a Republican conservative and Trump supporter, is saying this bill doesn't go far enough and fast enough, that it's not sufficiently good, which, of course, it's a Nancy Pelosi bill. Of course it doesn't go far enough and fast enough. It almost goes without saying that it doesn't go far enough and fast enough. That's what Nancy Pelosi does. Not far enough and fast enough. Meanwhile, new polling shows widespread public support in the U.S. for paid sick leave and for Medicare for all to fight the virus. And as you know, there are many advocates arguing that due to the unprecedented crisis of the coronavirus, that this proves the need for a national ban on water shutoffs by the utility companies. And I think that's very likely to happen. Also, there's news from the public health experts that single-payer systems coping with the coronavirus much more effectively than the for-profit model. And an article appeared in Common Dreams on that. It's by Jake Johnson, and he reports that the public health experts are making the case that countries with universal single-payer systems have thus far responded much more efficiently and effectively to the outbreak than nations like the United States, whose fragmented for-profit apparatus has struggled to cope with the crisis. The Washington Post reported this actually just yesterday, actually before the debates. So here are the debates, going on. Okay, before I get to the debate going on, the Trump administration, as we all know, only recently took tests to massively expand testing for the virus, sparking concerns that outbreak, in the United States is far more severe than the official numbers suggest. As I said, the official numbers here, as of this morning, said 3,774. Much more likely that it was 38,000. Could even have been as high as 76,000. It's 20 times more likely. In terms of the number of corona cases right now. The article points out that countries with forms of single-payer healthcare like South Korea and Denmark have for weeks been offering drive-through testing, and other innovations allowing them to quickly test hundreds of thousands of their citizens and respond accordingly. So they're testing hundreds of thousands of their citizens. And I don't even think in the whole country we have 8,000 tests yet. I don't even think there have been 8,000 people testing. Okay, by the way, the infection rates seem to be something on the order, or I should say, wait, I am botching this up. Okay, the percentage of people who seem to recover with mild symptoms or no symptoms, at all from the virus seems to be as high as 88% actually right now. Okay, then there are 12% who have severe cases, and then a certain percentage of those, of course, are critical cases, and a certain percentage of the critical cases, are going to die. We're not real hard on those percentages yet. For South Korea, we're talking about 20,000 tests per day. And then isolation of the people involved who are positive. School holidays have been extended. The advice of the government is for everybody to stay inside. All large events are canceled. These measures have resulted in the peak of cases falling from over 900 a day in South Korea to roughly 100 a day or less now. These cases have drastically fallen, according to the graph, which is why I said the virus had been caught up short there. There are quotes in the article from experts, in Denmark. And then Jake Johnson says that none of which is to say that countries with forms of single-payer healthcare or nationalized systems are flawlessly handling the pandemic, which has infected at least 173,000 people and killed more than 6,000 worldwide thus far. So the fatalities for the whole world are up to 6,000 now, according to the official statistics. Okay. And the director of strategy and operations at the Newfield Trust, a think tank over in the UK, has said that the NHS in the UK is in a relatively good position to cope with COVID-19 because it has a very clear emergency planning structure. We have no emergency planning structure here in the United States. If it ever was, it's now gone. It's now gone. And David Fisman, an epidemiologist at the University of Toronto, said that in a time of crisis like the coronavirus pandemic, having a healthcare system that's a public strategic asset rather than a business run for profit allows for a degree of coordination and optimal use of resources. Now, certain people here in this country, like, of course, Bernie Sanders, but also Bill de Blasio in New York, is calling for operations like the New Deal and like the mobilization in the Second World War to fight the pandemic. He's calling for the nationalization of private healthcare resources to make sure that we get 24/7 efforts to produce the ventilators, the masks, and the medicines that are needed to handle the crisis, and also most probably to handle the field hospitals that are going to need to be built in this country to help to handle the crisis. So Bill is talking like Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Actually, right now, hearing him talk right now, it's no surprise that he has been supporting Bernie Sanders. Okay. He's obviously a New Dealer. So, at any rate, just after the debate, when Joe Biden said, with all due respect for Medicare for all, you have a single-payer system in Italy. It doesn't work there. So critics were quick to take issue with his talking point. Unfortunately, Bernie wasn't quick to take issue with this talking point. He should have been a lot more nimble in responding to that. Healthcare reporter Jonathan Cohn at the HuffPost said, single payer isn't the reason that Italy is having problems. Italy's problem is health system capacity, independent of the health system design. And Jill Filipovic tweeted, this is the dumbest point. No, single payer does not solve the problem of pandemics, but it definitely solves the problem of thousands and thousands of people going bankrupt because there's a pandemic. It solves the problem of people not seeking out care for fear of bankruptcy. And David Himmelstein, co-founder of the Physicians for a National Health Program and distinguished professor of public health at City University of New York at Hunter College, said in a statement Sunday night that the fragmented system in the United States leaves public health separate and disconnected from medical care and provides no mechanism to appropriately balance funding priorities. As a result, public health accounts for less than 3% of overall health care expenditures, a percentage that has been falling for decades and is about half the proportion in Canada, or in the UK. One result is that state and local health departments that are at the front lines in dealing with epidemics have lost 50,000 positions since 2008 due to budget cuts. Okay, I want you to notice, we're talking since 2008. That covers the last year of the Bush administration and the whole Obama administration, as well as the Trump administration. So it's not only Trump who's been cutting public health. It was Obama and Bush too. It's a characteristic of neoliberalism to cut public health, and that's what's been happening. On the debate stage on Sunday, Bernie made the case for transitioning the U.S. to a single-payer program, arguing that the coronavirus exposes the incredible weakness and dysfunctionality of our current healthcare system. And you know what Bernie said there, so I'm not going to go into it, okay, at length. But the basic point is we would be having much less problem with the situation today because more people would have gone in to see doctors, and there would have been a greater push for testing, and there would have been an outcry for testing now if we had had a single-payer healthcare system. Okay. Now, Joe Biden responded to Bernie's call for a single-payer healthcare system during the debate last night. And what Joe said was, oh, look, we got to do something right now. I mean, we got to do something right now. Because we got to do something right now, what we got to do is we got to guarantee that people won't pay anything because they're getting treated for the coronavirus or they're getting tested, okay, for the coronavirus. We've got to guarantee that they won't be getting billed for that, and we've got to guarantee that they have the paid leave, okay, they need, and we've got to guarantee that they get some support if they're not able to work, okay, at their jobs. But this doesn't mean we have to have a single-payer system. We got to take care of what's necessary now. Okay, what's necessary now. Okay, and Bernie never really replied to that. So Biden makes the common sense point. Most people think it's a common sense point. Yeah, we got to take care of the crisis now. Then we can consider whether we need to have a Medicare for all system at some later date, okay, or not. That sounds sensible, but it's stupid for two reasons. Okay, and the two reasons are the following. We're going to have very little of this. We're not going to have a solution now to the coronavirus program while Donald Trump is in office. We'll get something out of this administration because the Republicans are starting to panic. Okay, it's not just the Democrats starting to panic. It's the Republicans who are starting to panic. And as you see, Tom Cotton saying that the Pelosi bill is too little and too late. So they want to do more, and they are going to do more. But they're not going to do enough to cure this crisis because they're not really disposed to do so, to really guard us against future coronavirus crises like the one next year that's likely to occur next year, because this may be coming back year after year. Depends on how many people are infected now and how many people develop immunity to the virus now. We're likely to have another epidemic in 1 year. Okay. What are we going to do about that? Trump is certainly not going to pass a single-payer system. The Republicans are certainly not going to pass a single-payer system. We can shout for that till we're blue in the face. The Republicans are not going to pass that without a revolution. And I'm not talking about a Sanders revolution either. I'm talking about a revolution that upsets the whole apple cart of these people. Okay? Without that, they're not going to pass a single payer health care bill. So we're not talking about now. We're not going to be able to handle the crisis now, not as we would wish to handle it. Not if we want to avoid a large number of bankruptcies and a too large number of fatalities. We might be able to do a lot. We might avoid having 6.6 million fatalities. Okay, we might get down to 200,000 or 300,000, but that's far, far too much. You know it's far, far too much. In World War II, we lost only 400,000 people. And that was over a 4-year period. I mean, the scale of the potential fatalities on this is too great if we do less than we should be doing. And when Biden says, well, we can't do anything now, he's not just saying the Trump administration can't do anything now. Okay? When he says we ought to do something now, he's saying that as soon as you vote me into office, what we need to do then, what we need to do now in 2021 is not to pass a single payer program, but to pass a program that's going to contain the damage caused by the coronavirus. Well, guess what, Joe? At that point in time, in 2021, when a new president takes office, that new president is likely to have an overwhelming degree of support to do something about the coronavirus and the depredations it is making on the American people, because this Congress will probably not do enough. It will not do enough to handle things. The Trump administration will not do enough to handle things. So the new president who comes in is going to be someone who's really got to end this, to take every measure that's necessary to end this. Which of the two Democratic candidates is going to do this? Is it going to be Joe Biden? Or is it going to be Bernie Sanders, who is likely to pass a Medicare for All bill on the first day? And in the midst of the coronavirus, he can probably be persuaded to pass one with no waiting period at all for people. Because I'll tell you what, there's no segregating coronavirus illnesses from other illnesses. Because if you only have a program that will treat people with coronavirus, what happens when those people get well, but they're left with lung dysfunctionality, or they're left with other diseases other than the coronavirus, the collateral diseases, which they've gotten because they're in a weakened state? Are they going to have to pay for their care? Are they going to have to go bankrupt getting treated in hospitals under the same old system? Are they going to die because they can't afford care? No. No, 1,000 times no. We can't have any more of this nonsense. We've got to have a system that is free at the point of service, that is going to care for all of us. And that is the Medicare for All system. Okay, so, of course, when I read the headlines over the breaking news, I was also talking about, or I also mentioned, the economic effects that happen to be occurring, that are going on here. So, what are these economic effects likely to be? I'm going to talk about that very briefly. A good article appeared in Popular Resistance by Kevin Zeske and Margaret Flowers. And it's called We're in a Recession and It's Likely to Get Worse. And they say the epidemic is creating an ongoing teachable moment that could be used to transform the U.S. Economy. And they say COVID-19 and the oil war, the one between the Saudis and the Russians, are triggers leading to a recession that has its roots in record corporate and personal debt, long-term low wages, and an artificially inflated stock market. The shortcomings of U.S. Economic policy, the healthcare system, and workers' rights are being magnified by the current crisis. The epidemiologists are reporting the coronavirus pandemic will last for months, maybe more than a year. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Absolutely. This is going to last for a very, very long time. At a minimum, it's going to last for 4 to 8 months. They don't even have the antiviral drugs done yet. They don't even have those done yet. They won't have a vaccine done for a year to 18 months. A survey of academic economists that was actually released on Thursday, and by the way, the article by Kevin and Margaret was released just yesterday on March 15th. The survey found that a majority of the academic economists are saying that even if the outbreak proves to be limited like the flu, it's likely to cause a major recession. They're being conservative because they don't want to scare people. If this outbreak gets to the fatality rates that I am talking about and the need for so many people to stay at home that I'm talking about, hang on a second. What happened? Oh, here. Something has happened to my camera. I hope you can still hear me. Let's see. Hopefully it went on again. Still hasn't gone on again. Excuse me a minute while I try to do something about this camera. Okay. Not there yet. There we go. I don't know if you're seeing me quite yet, but I am on, according to the streaming software. So here we are again. Okay, so back to Margaret and Kevin. Okay, if we have a pandemic that's going to last here for 4 to 8 months, people have to stay home for 4 to 8 months, we're going to have a depression, not just have a recession. Some of the economists are already predicting that we may already be in a recession, that we get the statistics, we might find that 5% of GDP is being lost over the period of a year. It could be even more. So we could be in a depression state. And many economists and politicians now are calling for responses involving cash payments to people to shore up the economy. Now, of all people, we got such a statement from actually Mitt Romney, who said he wanted $1,000 cash payment made, okay, to every American to prevent the collapse, okay, of the economy. Of course, it would not actually prevent it, but it could shore it up. Okay, and there's one economist whose name, okay, is Rasmus, but Jack Rasmus, who's closely associated with the Green Party, wrote last Sunday that a financial collapse was underway, okay, and that 40% of people in the United States can't handle a full $100 emergency, and 60% could not handle $1,000 surprise expense. And he denied that the fundamentals of the economy are strong. He said the problems include record consumer, corporate, okay, and government debt. I don't think that government debt is a problem at all, of course, but record consumer debt is certainly a problem. Wages are stagnant. Workers who have not recovered from the last collapse of 2008, and financial markets addicted to trillions of dollars from the Fed. He said even before the current collapse, college debt, unaffordable health care, okay, and inadequate retirement funds were among the problems creating economic insecurity for most people. Of course, the Fed has moved now to cut interest rates to zero for the first time since the financial crisis. And it's also announced, okay, a QE program of at least $700 billion of asset purchases, specifically mortgage securities and treasury securities. But of course, this is not going to change the course of the virus, and it's not going to open supply lines from the impacted countries, and it's not going to increase consumer spending. So, the article points out people in the U.S. are starting this recession in a weak financial situation. In December of 2019, there was a record $4.2 trillion in personal debt. Okay, in December of 2019, this broke the record, which was just about as much in the previous month, okay, in November of 2019. Student debt was already in crisis at $1.6 trillion and was impacting 45 million people with a delinquency rate of more than 11%. And Rasmus said only the U.S. household consumer was holding up the U.S. economy at year-end 2019. So the authors then say, now the economy is at a virtual standstill. Conferences and concerts are canceled. Colleges are switching to virtual classes. Public schools are closing. Broadway is dark. And professional sports are on hold. Of course, okay, our restaurants all over are having to close up. And there is no precedent, they point out, for the economy shutting down so quickly. That's very true. That, okay, is very true. As the New York Times describes, quote, when restaurants close their doors, they no longer need tablecloths, okay, that are delivered by linen services or beer from local brewers. When people stop flying, they no longer need taxis to the airport or $5 bottles of water from the airport newsstand. Zip Recruiter job postings for restaurant was down 26% compared to a year ago. Catering is down 39%. And there's been a 44% decline in aviation jobs because, of course, the airlines are not flying. Okay. We're undergoing a corporate collapse right now as the days go by. And happy talk from the administration is not going to stop this. We're also seeing the end of the oil, okay, and gas boom. Russia and Saudi Arabia could not agree on continuing to prop up the price, okay, of oil. So an oil war began with plunging prices between the two. And now prices could fall as low as $20 a barrel. which of course is still much above the production costs of oil. Saudi production costs are said to be $2.80 a barrel. But still, that's a very, very low rate, and the profits will be greatly cut. And others who have to compete with the Saudis will not be able to compete with the Saudis at $20 a barrel. A lot of those companies are going to go out of business, and their workers are not going to have jobs. There are going to be many bankruptcies in shale industries, which is actually a very good thing in the long run. But the basic point is that there's going to be a fossil fuel collapse coming at a time when the cost of renewable energy has consistently lowered costs, making wind and solar far more competitive than fossil fuels are. So that's going to change things drastically in the economy, as well as in politics, because with all those oil companies going out of business, how are they going to find the money to pressure the politicians to do what they want the politicians to do? That's going to have a great effect, on politics. So the 1.5 trillion the Fed announced it would inject into short-term markets is twice as large as the original size of the 2008 bank bailout. We're going to see big changes in politics and big changes in the economics. As of the writing of the article that I'm taking you through now by Zeiss, and Flowers, Wall Street had gotten the message from the stimulus, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average increased by 1,400 points. But then they say, but this is not likely to last. Of course, it lasted until today, when the market fell by 3,000 points. The only thing that's going to fix the market now, because the Fed is now down to zero interest rates, the only thing that's going to fix the market now is going to be heavy federal spending and supply of dollars to people who need the dollars to continue to consume. People have to continue to consume. And there are also going to be have to be measures to ensure that industries continue to supply in spite of the fact that people will have to go home. The absentee rates due to illness are going to be very large. So the workforce may have to be supplemented. It might even be necessary to bring our armed forces home, to mobilize them to support the national economy here. We're looking at some very profound economic and political changes that are afoot. Most probably, the Trump administration is not going to respond to these in a very agile fashion, an aggressive fashion, to say the least. Because Trump seems to be addicted to happy talk. Happy talk, more and more happy talk. And he did acknowledge today that this is a serious situation, but he still hasn't changed over from the happy talk. I expect he will, but of course, he seems addicted to boosterism and to lying, and that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a continuing problem for people. So what do we see going on as a result of this? I think we can project that within a week or two, or maybe 3, Trump's polling numbers are going to go through the floor. As of tonight, he was still polling with a small lead over Biden and over Sanders. He still had a lead. It was growing smaller, but he was still polling fairly well okay, in the latest polls I saw, okay, on Twitter. But when people see the market continuing to crash like this, when they see the economic effects start to spread through the economy and people getting sent home, there are going to be shouts of pain and screams that will be felt in Washington. And the Republicans and Democrats are both going to move to produce money for people. And Trump's approval rating is going to suffer while this is going on. And any attempt to backslide or to refuse to pass the kind of legislation that is necessary for right now, in other words, anything less than a Green New Deal and Medicare for All now, is going to cause Trump's approval rating to continue to slide. And if things get much worse than they are right now, even people in his own base are never going to forgive him. His base is already splitting. In 2 or 3 weeks, it's going to be even more split. So we're looking at a situation where the odds for a Democrat defeating Trump are going to be far more favorable than they are now. And we'll probably be seeing that in as short a time as a month from now. There's been a proposal by Jeremy Scahill and by Ryan Grim from The Intercept, and I put that, okay, in one of my links to this show. And the title of the article is "A Biden-Sanders Ticket, the Unthinkable May Be the Only Path Forward." On Sunday, Joe Biden posted a message on Twitter encouraging people to get out and vote in the upcoming primaries next week. Quote, "If you're feeling healthy, not showing symptoms, and not at risk of being exposed to COVID-19, please vote on Tuesday," unquote. Everybody over 18 is at some risk of being exposed to COVID-19, Joe. Everybody. But there are some people more at risk than others. The people over 50, Joe. The people over 50. The people who vote for you by the most overwhelming margins. Those people are most exposed to COVID-19. Anyway, the article goes on. He was rightly eviscerated, that it was public health misinformation. Certainly was misinformation. And they say everyone is at risk and people without symptoms may still be contagious. It was a deeply irresponsible thing to post. Yes, it was. But the criticism raises an uncomfortable set of questions. If it's a risk to public health to vote in public, and states are refusing to get serious about by using mail-in voting, is it irresponsible to vote should the primaries be canceled? Those questions may sound extreme today, but within just a few weeks, the answer may be an obvious yes. To avoid a scenario in which President Donald Trump uses the pandemic to his advantage while risking the lives of millions of Americans, the Biden and Bernie Sanders campaigns could broker a split ticket of Biden-Sanders with a clear, publicly announced, historically powerful role for Senator Warren, presumably Secretary of the Treasury. Such an arrangement would be infuriating to vast numbers of people in all three camps. It would anger the authors of this article. It would anger me too, because I think the Secretary of the Treasury should be Warren Mosler and not Elizabeth Warren. She doesn't know enough about the monetary system to make her the Secretary of Treasury. Anyway, say it would anger the authors of this very article. And they go on to say it is abundantly clear that the Trump administration cannot be trusted to handle the coronavirus pandemic. Yep. Its lies and incompetence are already responsible for endangering countless lives. Its lies and incompetence are already responsible for fatalities occurring right now. If there are 3774 cases counted okay, in the country. There have to already be fatalities occurring. Some of those might have been avoided if we started testing a month and a half ago, as we should have. The WHO tests were available a month and a half ago. We could have started testing then. Within 2 weeks, we could have been involved in mass testing. We could have uncovered the likely 38,000 cases of the coronavirus that there are in the country right now. We would know where they are. We would know what to contain. We would know what to shut down. We would know where the burden of treatment was going. We would know all this if not for Trump, okay, and his idiocy. And by the way, a mistake at the CDC. I mean, they didn't consider the situation seriously enough to just take the WHO test. I mean, this didn't have to stop them from developing their own test if they thought they would have a better one. They had no business holding up the testing. That this pandemic is hitting in the midst of voting in the Democratic presidential primary is concerning on multiple levels, say the authors. Okay, among them are the risk to individual voters who need to physically go to places of large congregation and potentially stand in line for hours. This scenario then opens up a broader risk of spread, including through asymptomatic carriers who believe that because they're not exhibiting symptoms, it is safe for them to go to such gatherings. The DNC is going to be facing some gravely serious decisions on how to proceed and whether to even hold a convention. Many of Joe Biden's supporters believe that Biden already has the nomination sewn up. Some have suggested Bernie Sanders should drop out of the race. Sanders, who has run for 5 years on the central issue of Medicare for all and radically addressing the climate crisis, clearly believes that the coronavirus pandemic is a powerful illustration of why we need radical change in order to protect public health and the planet. With most delegates remaining to be won, the vast number of voters who have not yet cast their ballots deserve to be counted. The DNC has already been roundly criticized by Sanders and his supporters for how it handled the 2016 primary and, to an extent, the way it has governed the 2020 process. If the DNC were to take action to cancel the primaries and crown Biden, with most of the state's voters disenfranchised, it would shatter the party's credibility and give concrete justification to voters who believe their votes were stolen by the DNC to do any number of things in November, including not voting for the Democratic candidate. There are some obviously terrible dimensions to this plan. The idea of two old straight white men on a ticket is absurd, as is the idea of two old, if not quite as old, straight white men floating it. Many supporters of both Sanders and Biden have been pushing for the vice presidential slot to be filled by a person who is not an elderly straight white man. But perhaps the unprecedented moment we are living in requires us to think differently. Biden represents a large coalition within the Democratic Party base, his wide support from the African American community, and appeals to some of the traditional Republicans. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, represents a young, diverse coalition of voters inside and outside of the Democratic Party. He is powered by real social movements and has a large base of support with the Hispanic voters. Actually, with the Latino voters, they say. The fastest growing segment of the U.S. electorate, he would also be the first Jewish president. Neither Biden's campaign nor Sanders is simply about these men. It is about the people and institutions their platforms happen to represent. From Sanders' perspective, he is at a moment of the maximum degree of leverage, but realistically has little path to the nomination. Many Sanders supporters have expressed concern about Biden's clear cognitive decline. The reality is that despite those concerns, many Democratic voters have made clear they want him as the nominee. If Biden continues to win primaries, he's the nominee. If Sanders starts to upset Biden in low turnout primaries, the party leadership will almost assuredly cry foul and move to invalidate the primaries. Sanders would lose even if he wins. What they're speaking to there is the possibility that older voters stay away from the polls and that the black voters supporting Joe Biden also stay away from the polls because then they tend to be the older black voters. So if younger voters who are less at risks are the only ones who go to the polls, just the 18 to 50 group, and Bernie starts to upset Joe Biden in later primaries after tomorrow, if those primaries continue to be held, then the party leadership will almost assuredly say, hey, these other voters didn't get a chance to vote. They'll cry foul, and they'll move to invalidate the primaries. So Sanders would lose even if he wins. And along the way, the curve of the pandemic would be ratcheted even steeper, potentially adding hundreds of thousands to the death toll, if not more. To make it work, this compromise could not simply be a symbolic offering of the vice presidential nomination in an effort to placate Bernie's supporters. There would need to be an agreement, more akin to a parliamentary power-sharing agreement, among Biden, Sanders, and Warren. Biden simply pledging to adopt some of Sanders and Warren's plans carries far less weight. At a minimum, Sanders' plans on health care, the climate crisis, workers' rights, immigration, and criminal justice ought to be accepted as the official platform of the ticket. Already, public opinion is swinging wildly towards a stronger government role in funding health care, guaranteeing sick leave, and broadly creating a more safe and secure society. It is encouraging that Biden recently stated that he was adopting Warren's financial plan, however serious that support happens to be. Warren could play a central role in the brokering process. It is clear from the states that have voted and many national polls that Biden choosing Warren as his running mate would not have the same impact as choosing Sanders, given the overlapping coalitions of Warren and Biden. None of this actually makes it right, but it is empirically evident. It has become clear that many of Sanders' supporters believe, as events has evolved since Super Tuesday, that Sanders has a real chance at doing what most analysts feel is impossible, winning a nomination outright. That may well be true, but it seems unlikely. But the situation is, that the progressives in the U.S. have not held this type of influence in an election campaign since Henry Wallace, one of the most left-wing members of the cabinet, was named Franklin Delano Roosevelt's vice president in the 1940 election. In 1944, with Roosevelt in declining health, party leaders managed to shunt Wallace aside for Harry Truman, expecting correctly that whoever became the vice president would rise to the presidency. Truman later fired Henry Wallace, who was the Secretary of Agriculture at the time, for being a pacifist. Impolite as it may be to say, the prospect of Biden, Sanders, and Trump, all in their 70s, campaigning for the next 7 months, is a major roll of the dice. They're all in the high-risk category, and Trump appears unwilling to take even the most basic of precautions. Nobody is safe from the virus entirely, but that reality doesn't mean that Biden and Sanders can't run together. It means they should work to stay safe. And if they don't, the party will need a new alternative. For Sanders to sacrifice the possibility, however remote, of the nomination for the sake of public health would be a portrait of leadership in stark contrast to the narcissistic kind of negligence on display from the current occupant of the White House. Not just the narcissistic negligence, but reports are that Trump tried to buy a German company that is soon going to produce or may soon produce a coronavirus vaccine so that the President of the United States could profit from the development and sale of this vaccine from a German company. That this happened was confirmed by the German government. It's amazing. It's not simply negligence. It's looting. It's public looting. It's been going on since the beginning of this administration. For Sanders supporters, entering the coalition with Biden, I've gone back to the article now, would be a viciously bitter pill to swallow. It sure would. In the absence of the novel coronavirus crisis and the nature of the current president, we have a hard time imagining this proposal ourselves. But the reality is that Trump has to go. The reality is that millions of people in this country are in dire condition long before this virus hit us. The reality is that we cannot risk public health by forcing people to stand in lines waiting to vote. The passionate debates about the nature and future of the Democratic Party will not go away anytime soon. It is, in fact, its own crisis. But a Biden-Sanders administration would provide for a much safer environment to have this particular fight. Well, I think this proposal is something we all ought to think about. It's worth a vetting. I just encountered it this evening, about a half hour before the show. I'm not in a position to think it through completely now. Okay. What I would think would have to be the case is that somehow it has to be guaranteed in some concrete way that there is a sharing of power sufficient for Sanders to be able to assure that his program, the Medicare for All program, the Green New Deal, and so on, would be at the forefront of the presidency, of Joe Biden, as long as Joe Biden can stay, in that particular role. Now many of us have mentioned and talked about the cognitive decline of Joe Biden. If that's really a serious issue and that is really going on, as it seems to be, then the truth is that Joe Biden will not be able to stay the president even for the 4 years that he is elected for. Now, Joe Biden, and Bernie say they're friends. In fact, there might be something to that, at least a certain cordiality, from being in the Senate at the same time and from knowing each other for years. But Bernie has a legendary ability to work with people who do not agree with him. He's very, very good at that. In a framework where his platform, is guaranteed, where much of his platform, is actually guaranteed to be represented in the administration, he may well be able to work with Biden to push it forward. Now, it depends on who else is in the administration and is influencing the administration. It's pretty clear that whatever deal would be made would have to exclude the flagship types of neoliberals from the Biden administration. No Obamas, no Larry Summers. The Treasury Secretary, if the Treasury Secretary is Elizabeth Warren, then the head of the Economics Council has to be Jamie Galbraith or Stephanie Kelton, okay? And one of these also has to succeed to the chairperson of the Fed when that particular position is vacant. Those kinds of deals have to be made. I don't know how they can be guaranteed. That's something I have to think through. But we have to know that if Bernie makes this kind of compromise, that whoever heads up the ticket, that there's going to be a legislative push for this by the Democratic Party as soon as they get into power. There's going to have to be something like the first days of the New Deal, okay, of FDR, because we've got to have that right now, especially when it comes to Medicare for all and doing something about the emergency we have with the climate. So I'm going to end on that note, and I'm going to consider your comments at this point. And Bonnie's going to shake her head, and maybe other people will shake their head too, but there is still, I'm going to refresh my page to see how many of you are really here. My page is telling me there are 14 of you still here. We shall see.
I said 20.
We shall see. Two, but there's still, I'm going to, okay. I cut off the echo. There are still 15 of you here. So I am going to take your comments because many of you are waiting. Russ said, I paid for some N95 masks, but they sent me basic dust masks. Oh, well. I mean, not oh, well. You need to get a refund because the dust masks are not going to help. Russ said, what's the possibility this event could lead to martial law? I think the Democrats are just going to oppose that with Trump as president. I don't know. There's certainly a danger, of martial law being declared by the Trump administration. I don't know what the level of opposition is going to be to that. There was a news item in Common Dreams also today. In fact, it's the top item, unless something has appeared since I went on the air. With nations focused on coronavirus, rights groups warn the Senate against handing Trump terrifying spy powers. That's not simply martial law, but of course, I think martial law would get close to that. So we have to see what would happen. The president does have the authority to declare martial law, but if he does, and if the Congress is overwhelmingly against it, I think the Congress can still impeach the president and convict the president, whether martial law, or no. We have to see. But if he declares martial law, we're in line for a constitutional crisis. But very definitely. Who knows what may result, from that effort. It's very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. So Barbara Reed asks, will IRS postpone the April 15th deadline? That, I don't know. I don't know. The IRS has to send out refund checks to people. That's going to be critical. But of course, the IRS could easily postpone the filing of the returns without people having to ask for an extension by 6 months. That could easily happen. Kay says, we need a UBI now, but Dylan Ratigan called for that, and Tulsi Gabbard and Mark Pocan sponsored a bill for it in Congress. But of course, it is not going nowhere. It may be going nowhere now, But okay, if Mitt Romney could call for $1,000 cash payment, if things continue to get worse, that might very easily pass. If it passes, it must pass in the context of a job guarantee. The reason why it must is because the level of productivity in the economy, okay, the production levels of something of value to people have to be kept up, or the stimulus created by that kind, okay, of a UBI guarantee could lead to very serious inflation in an economy where production is drastically falling. If the goods are not there to meet the increase in purchasing power, we risk a wartime kind of inflation. So we have to balance things off as we would in a war. We would have to use bonds or taxes to siphon off the effects of a UBI from those who do not need it, okay, who have enough money. Kay says, I know, Lana, we need it all the time, but I will take what little I can get. I'm poverty struck. Big time. Okay, if you're poverty struck big time, Kay, you'd probably do better with the job guarantee, okay, at your age, because the job guarantee would pay $15 an hour. And $15 an hour is a lot more than $1,000 a month, okay, if you think about it. And jobs can be provided for you to work at home, okay, and you could start being paid as soon as the job guarantee is passed by Congress. All you'd have to do is go and register, and you could be paid on a weekly basis if the legislation is written correctly. It's a much better deal to have a job guarantee and then to have the $1,000 a month only for those who need the $1,000 a month, okay, and who do not want to work. Steve Gonzo said, is everyone braced for the next wave of rigging? It's well underway. I know that. Evelina says, it's pretty obvious U.S. health system is not prepared for a pandemic. Won't be anytime soon. Evelina says, sooner rather than later. Okay, and by the way, I need to ask you to please share this, and share, like, and subscribe to the YouTube video when I put it up. Unfortunately, in this particular streaming software, I don't have my screen to show you, okay, to remind you. But you can go to patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. But please, I need some Patreon contributions to keep going. Kay says, Bernie had a great online rally tonight with Neil Young and others. I know. I saw the online rally. Okay, it was wonderful, but it's a little disconcerting not to have all the applause and the stamping of feet and all the things that go into a live rally. But still, it was very impressive. It was certainly very good. And Sharon Anthony Connor says, Gohmert is holding up the COVID-19 relief bill in the Senate. I don't think Louis Gohmert is in the Senate. He's holding it up in the House somehow. I don't know how he's holding it up in the House. Seems to me that Nancy Pelosi can just override him, that he can't block it, okay, in the House. I'm pretty sure Louis Gohmert, okay, is not a senator. Okay, and Lana says, I am not a UBI fan. In fact, I think he's a congressman from Iowa, isn't he? Well, Lana says, I can't stand that Texas moron. Yeah, he's certainly not the senator from Texas, or one of the senators from Texas, because the two of them are John Cornyn and Ted Cruz. So Kay says, we need it now and for quite a while until this clusterfuck is over, at least. And Sharon Anthony Connor says, Romney suggested a one-time $1,000 payment to each adult, but I read an article the other that suggested 1,000 monthly payments until this is over. An obvious suggestion since Yang actually ran on this. Kay said, I'm so tired today, didn't sleep well last night. My roommate works in an assisted care facility and can easily bring it home for both of us. SMH, I'm not afraid of death, but I don't want to suffer. Sharon Anthony Connor says, actually, there is a company in Canada already working on a vaccine. Okay, if you got a job guarantee, Kay, you'd be able to afford to rent your own place. There's enough there that you'd be able to rent a place. Sharon Anthony Connor says, actually, there is a company in Canada already working on a vaccine, and another company has a vaccine they're doing a live trial on now. I'm sure there is, but even after they do the trials, it has to pass all the tests. The estimates from Anthony Fauci at this point are 12 to 18 months before there's going to be a vaccine that will be available to the public. And Russ says, I can still hear you. I need to cut out. See you again soon. Thanks for coming, Russ. Evelina says, thrash the old healthcare system. The Medicare for all would be less costly if you consider the economic effects of a pandemic, not to mention the lives lost. Please mention the lives lost, because those are going to be a killer. We cannot even imagine here in the United States losing 1% of the population to this virus. If we lost 3.3 million people, people would just lose confidence in the government, lose confidence in the legitimacy of the government entirely. We cannot sustain such a blow, okay, in this country. Okay, Lana says, you are brave watching the pandemic. No thanks. Susan says, if we go into a recession, Trump will lose the general election. We're going to go into a depression. And yes, he's going to lose the general. But the point is, okay, the danger is, okay, that the Democratic Party will think that since Trump can't possibly win, it's okay to not give anything to Sanders and to just have Joe Biden run as the nominee. Because who else are people going to vote for? That would be the worst of all outcomes. Sharon Anthony says, trial vaccine program, AP News. Thank you, Sharon Anthony, for the link. I will certainly check it out, and I'll probably mention it in my next live stream tomorrow night. Okay, Evelina says, this is a nightmare. Praying it is benign in countries south of the border, although many of them have a public health system. They vary in effectiveness and or in resources. Yes, they do, but so do we. Sharon Anthony says, found the article on the monthly payments from CNBC. Yeah, that's, of course, based on the Yang proposal, right? It was obvious someone was going to suggest we should give him $1,000 a month. That's what Andrew Yang proposed. Andrew Hillis says, yes, $1,000 a month is not enough. That's why we need the job guarantee at least the $15 an hour wage. I personally favor a wage that's $15 an hour in the lowest cost place in the United States, and that is cost adjusted from there on up, and that would probably average across the country $22 or $23 an hour. Andrew Hillis says $1,000 per month is not enough. Sharon says gas was $1.94 here the other day. Yeah, it was a similar price here the other day. Here is in Northern Virginia. Sharon Anthony Connor says this article says we're now in a recession. Thanks for the link. I believe we are in a recession right now. But thank you for the link. That's very good. Okay, Evelina says, had the U.S. economy been transitioning already? This shock to the system could have been avoided. Yes, it could have. Steve Day smiles. Okay, Evelina says, Dr. Joe, I read U.S. troops were being deployed in large numbers in Europe. What is that about? I don't know. I haven't heard that. Kay says, I'm a tired old bag, so I'm going to bed. Try to have a peaceful night. We'll talk soon. Stay safe and well all. Good night, Kay. Sleep well, says Steve Wolfbrandt. Evelina says, sleep well and take care of yourself. L. Stephen Day says, leaders should understand epidemiology. Well, Bernie Sanders certainly understands epidemiology. About Biden, I don't know. Susan says, never Biden. Steve Day says, Sanders, Sanders, okay, is representing my views. Evelina says, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Well, that's unacceptable. Okay, Evelina says, damned if you vote or don't vote. Okay, I mean, Steve says, I think about recording a video at the polls of me going Pelosi on my vote card with a few choice words while I walk right back out. Fuck, they're rigged. BS. Hashtag Ohio is the worst. Sharon Anthony Connors makes a face. What is that? I guess it's a dog shaking a fist or a cat shaking a fist. I can't tell. A tiger shaking a fist. Evelina Ponte says article is saying Sanders should withdraw to make Trump look worse. Already looks worse. Why should Sanders sacrifice his presidency? It's not his presidency. It's our presidency. Why should Sanders sacrifice his presidency? Okay, remember, it's not me. It's us. Why should Sanders sacrifice our presidency? Barbara Reed is still here. Steve Day is still here. Sharon Anthony Connor says, I saw an article where they said the dust masks are just as effective. Well, I'd like to see that article, but the N95 masks are rated specifically in a way. Oh, so Sharon said, no, he's blocking it from going to the Senate. How can he block it from going to the Senate? He can't block it from going to the Senate. He can just be outvoted. He doesn't have the power to block this. I mean, Lumi Gohmert is a member of a minority party. He doesn't have the power to block it. If Nancy Pelosi wants to, she can simply override his vote and override the vote of every other Republican who votes with him. He doesn't have the power to block it. And Steve Day says federal community service jobs at a living income. I mean, he gives the acronym for that, FCSJLI. Sharon Anthony says, nope, I posted the article about the Vax trial. And Gary Hauk joined. Okay, thanks, Sharon Anthony. I'll read that. Sharon Anthony says that would be $2,700 a month at $15 an hour. And how about at $22 an hour after a cost of living adjustment? How much would that be, Sharon Anthony? Okay, multiply 2,080 by $22 an hour. Gary Hauk has joined, and Randy says third party run. I don't know if Bernie would do that. One reason why, of course, is that he's given his word that he would not. But another reason is that he might be afraid that if he does that, that Donald Trump would still win. And I think that with the coronavirus thing actually going on, at least he knows that Biden is going to listen to the scientific advisors. Okay, Don McCaslin said, will housing prices decrease? If there's a crash, housing prices are going to decrease. Yes, they are. Steve Day says Biden is a placeholder for DNC to later nullify his nominee status and shoe in their choice for November. Lana has joined, and Sharon Anthony Connors answers at $22 an hour, it would be $3,960. So it would vary between $2,700 to an average of $3,960 an hour, and it might top out at $28 or $29 an hour for places like Los Angeles and New York City and other very high-cost places, like maybe those in Silicon Valley. Yeah, NBC News. I saw something like that. I didn't have a chance to read it. That's because it didn't seem to me he could do very much about it. I mean, because Nancy Pelosi can simply change the rules, okay, at any time and just pass it over his objections. He doesn't have the power. She can steamroll him. She can simply steamroll him. Yeah, I know he's objecting to it. I'm saying Nancy Pelosi has the power to simply steamroll him. He doesn't even have the control of the majority of his committee. He's a minority member of the House. He may be the ranking member, okay, on his committee, but Nancy Pelosi can take the bill away from that committee, put it on the floor herself, and get the vote she needs. What she's really waiting for is the Senate to come back in session. I don't see that Gohmert has the power, okay, to delay this, but I'll read it, and if necessary, I'll talk about it some tomorrow night. Okay, so Steve Gonzo gives me a link to something. I don't know what that's about, but it looks like that's the last comment you've made. Brace yourselves. Bernie Sanders getting another major rigging. Burn it down. Fuck the DNC. Okay? That's a new meme. Okay. So I think we're about done for tonight. Looks to me, okay, like we're about done. So I'm going to say good night. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this when it appears on YouTube, which will be probably within 20 minutes from now. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for supporting me by coming. And please occasionally go to my Patreon page. Thank you very much. And good night, all. I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly did. And Bonnie seems to have enjoyed it because she sent me a heart. Okay, I'm ending now, folks. Good night.